It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, Israel's ground offensive pushes deeper into Gaza. Sources inside Gaza say Israeli forces have effectively cut the territory in half, blocking the route south, as Israel rescues a female soldier held hostage by Hamas. Coming up, as the Israeli Prime Minister rejects calls to stop the bombardment, we'll hear from the desperate families making a fresh appeal for their loved ones' release. Also tonight, a judge rules that the police officer charged with murder over the shooting of Chris Kaba can be named publicly. A number of armed police handed in their guns when the officer was charged last month. We'll get reaction to today's news from a former firearms officer. Storm Kieran is due to hit the UK later this week, but plenty of wild weather around already. I'm going to speak to a landlady whose pub partially collapsed after a weekend of heavy rain. And a British soldier finally laid to rest more than a century after he died in World War I. I'll be joined by one of Lance Sergeant Robert Brown's relatives and the war detectives who identified him. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Israel's Prime Minister says his country will not agree to a ceasefire, saying this evening, this is a time for war. He was speaking after Israel's ground forces pushed further into Gaza, blocking the main road south. Despite the escalation and fears for what it might mean for those abducted by Hamas, Mr. Netanyahu insisted Israel is still committed to freeing every hostage. A warning that this report from our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey includes the moment a tank opened fire on a car. It also includes graphic descriptions of injuries.
Deep inside Gaza now, Israeli troops taking over houses and planning movements. Outside, these Israeli Defense Force pictures showed tanks and armoured personnel carriers manoeuvring through Gaza. This is a proper invasion and bombing campaign that appears to be growing by the day. The Israeli government wants this to be seen home and abroad. But there are pictures less likely to be approved by the IDF as its campaign continues. This terrifying video is captured by a Gaza journalist on the main road heading south from Gaza City. The car ahead hasn't seen there is a tank on the right. The journalists film as the car suddenly attempts to turn. The tank fires. The journalists say an entire family was killed. In a panic, they rush to get away. Other cars are travelling towards the tank. They lean out of the car, shouting for everyone to turn back. There is the sound of another tank round. Some stop, others do not. The road south is now blocked. The Israeli Prime Minister says there will be no let-up.
Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war.
The aerial onslaught on Gaza is quite staggering in its intensity. IDF video shows building after building being destroyed. And eyewitnesses have told Sky News that the north is now cut off from the relative safety of the south. By splitting Gaza in half, the Israeli Defense Forces can now focus their attention exclusively on the Hamas positions in the north, in Gaza City, and of course the tunnels beneath the city. But this manoeuvre does raise questions about the safety of civilians, thousands of whom have stayed behind or have even returned. Hundreds of thousands have moved south, many to the city of Khan Yunis. It has been attacked, but it's in better shape than towns to the north. With his family, Abdul Nasser Lajkar has made it from Gaza City. He says he had no choice.
It doesn't matter if you're in Gaza or Khan Yunis or anywhere else. There's no safe place. There's no place that is immune from bombing. Gaza is being bombed, Sarat's being bombed, Khan Yunis is being bombed. Everywhere's being bombed. That's why we're out sitting on the street.
Showing us shrapnel marks on his car, he says the journey south was horrendous as Israel attacked.
We saw a lot of destruction. They hit a car in front of us, and we saw legs and hands on top of the car. They all became like when you slaughter an animal, how you cut them up into pieces. That's what happened to the occupants of the car. We got out of our car, and we could not comprehend what we were seeing.
The Israeli military is determined to succeed. Hamas and its militias are determined to fight. Civilians are stuck. There is nowhere to run and nowhere to hide in Gaza. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News in southern Israel.
Hamas released a video of 3 Israeli hostages today, a move condemned as cruel psychological propaganda by Benjamin Netanyahu. One hostage was freed today, a female soldier in the IDF, but there are still around 200 believed to be in captivity in Gaza. And tonight, the families of some of them issued a new plea for their return.
And I'd like to say to our Rimon, who's now held hostage with her husband, you'll soon be back home with us. We will do everything in order to bring you back home as soon as possible. I do not wish upon any mother to go through what we've been going through over these past 24 days.
Let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's in Jerusalem for us this evening. And Alistair, the desperate families, they're renewing their appeal for the return of their loved ones. And the backdrop to this is the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying now is the time for war, because it is thought by many people that some kind of pause in the bombardment may help their safe rescue or release.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of calls internationally to have a pause in the airstrikes and the ground campaign. People are not going towards a ceasefire, but what they want is what's described as a humanitarian pause for 2 reasons. One, as you say, to get humanitarian aid into Gaza safely, because some is going in, but they need a lot more. I mean, 10, 20 times the amount that's currently going in. But also, there have been rumours that some sort of hostage deal could be done, but Hamas say we need a pause in the fighting because we need to gather together everybody that we've taken hostage into one safe place, and we can then move them out. Now, those negotiations have been mediated by Qatar, who have a direct line to Hamas, but for whatever reason, Israel has decided, well, at least for now, that they don't believe that there is much in it. They don't believe the credibility of those talks. I'm being told that they think that Hamas was stringing them along to try and delay a ground invasion. And so they have gone in, at least in this, of what they're describing as a second phase. They're not saying this is the ground invasion, it's the second phase. But, I mean, in many ways, I think to a lot of people it will look like a ground invasion. One bit of good news on the hostage front from an Israeli point of view is that a young soldier was released last night. Now, we don't know the circumstances of how she was found, how she was released, but here she is back reunited with her family. And so I think that will give them some reason to believe that operating on the ground might mean that they can find more people and get them released as well.
Alistair, thank you. Alistair Bunkle with an update for us from Jerusalem this evening. A judge has ruled today that the police officer charged with murder following the fatal shooting of Chris Kaba can be publicly named. Chris Kaba died when he was shot through the windscreen of a car in south-east London in September last year. The name and date of birth of the officer charged with killing him is going to be made public in January. However, their home address or any image of them cannot be published. Let's speak now to Harry Tangi, former armed response officer and firearms commander for Devon and Cornwall Police. Harry, thank you for joining us on the UK tonight. What's your view on that decision made by the judge today?
I think it's disastrous. I think the same processes with law are taking place as if an individual walked down the street and shot their neighbour. There is no distinction, and that's obviously what is hopefully being changed with what the Home Secretary and Commissioner has tried to put. I really need to make it clear But being a police officer, I mean, I sent to stick up for the good side of policing, just to remind people that it's out there. There's an awful lot of it, and yet I get an onslaught of trolls, and they really try to bury you. That's just on social media. I also know many officers who have been involved in shootings, and it's not only them or their husbands or wives that are being targeted, but their children in school. And these processes take an awful long time, don't they, before they come to court? And so the lives for these children are made a misery. This isn't, again, some individual who is, if we're talking related to somebody, a civilian. Police are very publicised, and there's people who just don't like the police. And so it's far more impactful for police officers to be named, but there's nowhere to hide. And quite frankly, even if everything, again, speaking very generically, just it comes to nothing and there's not guilty or it doesn't go to court, it doesn't matter. The name's out there and they'll forever be reminded that you are that individual and it can't be escaped. And I think this is going to have a huge impact on recruitment as well, because recruitment for armed response was probably bad enough. Now, if it's not the officer, even if the potential officer is keen to join the armed response, their families are going to say, not on your Nelly. You do not do that, because for the same money, we can do frontline, which is just as difficult, but doesn't hold the risks.
We've had a statement from the Police Federation of England and Wales this evening. It came in just before we came on air, Harry. I'll just read it to our viewers. It says, the Police Federation is seriously concerned and bitterly disappointed about the potential ramifications of publishing the officer's name and date of birth in January next year. Officers are not looking to be above the law, but they must have confidence that they have the protection needed to do the difficult and dangerous job society expects of them. You touched there on the consequences for recruitment. What about the consequences for current serving firearms officers? Because we know that at the beginning of this, when it was mooted that this may happen, that the name may be released, firearms officers actually handed in their guns. That's how contentious this was for them. What happens now?
Time will tell. I think some officers, my experience over 30 years, that some officers think it's the same with police pursuits. Hopefully it won't happen to me. They get satisfaction from the job they're doing. Armed response officers, we're asking to deal with some of the most dangerous people in society, and they just want to be treated basically as witnesses. And obviously, if there's a carte blanche, obvious case where an officer has gone rogue and shot someone, that's a different matter. But we're talking if information intelligence is gathered, officers are being sent to any incidents where there's highly believed that firearms will be, they may be threatened with firearms or other lethal weapon. They're thrown into a spontaneous incident. They're highly trained. They just want that comfort. They're not immediately going to be treated like a suspect. This is totally different. Yes, they should be accountable, must be accountable. They want to be accountable. But basically, would you do it with the way it is now? Really? You could go and make a split decision over something that is happening in front of you, spontaneous, no time to prepare, something is happening. You make a decision, and then you are then treated as if you've walked down the street with a gun and shot someone randomly. Exactly the same process, and that's how it is at the moment. And that's what they're saying. It really needs to change, because otherwise you're going to have no firearms officers either there at the moment.
Okay.
I think, I'll be honest with you as well, they think the Met is in a right mess at the moment. There's a serious issue with leadership, not all leadership, I'll make that clear, but there's a serious concern with leadership, and they feel expendable.
Okay, Harry, good to talk to you and get your point of view. There's Harry Tangi, former firearms officer. Thank you. No doubt in the fullness of time we'll get more reasoning behind the judge's decision to name the police officer in January of next year. Now, Boris Johnson's former private secretary issued an apology today to the families who lost loved ones during the COVID pandemic. Martin Reynolds, who earned the nickname Party Marty due to his role in the Partygate scandal, is one of the most high-profile members of the Johnson government to give evidence to the official COVID inquiry so far. And tomorrow, it is the turn of Dominic Cummings. Our political correspondent Tamara Cohen has more.
Boris Johnson's right-hand man, at his side as the key decisions of the pandemic were made. And he admits there were glaring holes.
The machine was not properly prepared for the scale of the crisis it was about to face.
Martin Reynolds, sitting here with Boris Johnson, shot to public attention during the Partygate scandal because of this email inviting dozens of Downing Street staff to gather in the garden and bring their own booze. Today, an apology.
I think I would first like to say how deeply sorry I am for my part in those events and for the email message which went out that day. And I'd like to apologise unreservedly to the families of all those who suffered during COVID.
Today's evidence to the inquiry paints a picture of dysfunction and personality clashes at the top of government. And then there's the question of how lockdown decisions were made, with advisers accused of using secretive WhatsApp groups to make the critical calls.
Mr. Reynolds was on a WhatsApp group with Boris Johnson and a small group of the most senior aides. He was asked why, just weeks before this public inquiry was announced, he decided to turn on disappearing mode so the messages would vanish after 7 days.
I don't believe it was intended to prevent the inquiry from having sight of this. It could, for example, have been because I was worried of someone screenshotting or using some of the exchanges and leaking them.
Some newly released messages and diary entries give a sense of the turmoil. Top civil servant Simon Case said the government looked like a tragic joke, and Boris Johnson cannot lead. Patrick Vallance, the chief scientific advisor, called the Prime Minister completely inconsistent. Tonight, families of those bereaved by COVID held a vigil at Barnard Castle, the town notoriously visited by Dominic Cummings in defiance of lockdown rules. We'll hear from him tomorrow, and later this week, NHS leaders on the consequences of political decisions. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Parts of the UK are bracing for the arrival of Storm Ciarán this week. An amber warning has been issued for Northern Ireland tonight, and there are warnings in place for parts of England, Scotland and Wales in the coming days. But even before Ciarán's arrival, some areas are already counting the cost of wild weather. Sky correspondent Stephen Murphy has this report.
It was a wet weekend in many parts of the UK, and the bad news is that more of the same is to follow in the days ahead. The seaside resort of Bognor Regis was badly affected by the heavy rain. A caravan park submerged. The car park of the local Tesco completely flooded as West Sussex Fire and Rescue Service battled to keep the waters from an electrical substation. In Devon, a family-run pub collapsed following torrential rain.
It's the impact on all my staff. I employ 20 full and part-time. It's my livelihood, it's my son and his family's livelihood, and all the people that had booked their celebrations for Christmas that we're having to cancel. It's just devastating.
In Northern Ireland, there was severe traffic disruption with many roads closed by flooding. There are multiple rain warnings in place for Northern Ireland for the week ahead, including an amber rain warning, the second highest level. The Met Office is warning of between 25 and 50 millimetres of rain falling. And the problem is a lot of that will be falling on already saturated land, which greatly increases the risk of flooding and further disruption. And then there's Ciarán. The third named storm of the season arrives in the UK on Wednesday into Thursday amid a flurry of yellow warnings, bringing heavy, persistent rain and forecasted gusts of up to 80 miles per hour.
We may need to escalate at least portions of the warning to amber, and red isn't out of the question. This is an exceptionally deep area of low pressure that's coming towards us. In fact, it could be record-breaking in as much as it could be the deepest area of low pressure to make landfall in England in November.
It promises to be a wet and windy few days for many parts of the country, including areas already struggling to deal with the fallout from Storm Babette. Stephen Murphy, Sky News.
And a little later in the programme, I'm going to be speaking to the pub landlady who you saw in Stephen's report there, Heather, from the Ship Inn. She'll be on the programme at around 8:45. Still to come on the UK tonight, dozens of Just Stop Oil protesters arrested in central London, with a group calling for 3 weeks of action. An apology from the Portuguese police to the parents of Madeleine McCann. And Police appealed for help after officers were attacked with fireworks in Doncaster.
I was single at 38. I feared that I was going to miss out on motherhood. And so after dating not being successful, I decided to embark on solo parenthood. I had IVF at Manchester Fertility, and I have now got a 5-year-old daughter as a result of that. I think that the main thing for me is we need equality between single women and same-sex couples. It was decided same-sex couples would get access to treatment, and therefore it is just discrimination on relationship status if single women aren't treated in the same way. For me, it was a relatively simple, in the scheme of things, procedure, but that, you're still talking towards the region of £10,000. But there's some women, I coach women who are considering this path to parenthood, so speak to lots of women about this. And there are some women who are paying, tens of thousands of pounds for this. The first step would be to go to a fertility clinic and get your fertility tested. And then depending on the results of the fertility tests, then a consultant will give you the options. There are usually 2 routes. One would be IUI, which is a less invasive procedure, and the second would be IVF. And it really depends on your age, on whether there is any fertility issues, and that's something the clinic will advise you on. I think a lot of single women, not everybody, everyone has a different journey, but lots had hoped to meet somebody, and so are therefore maybe slightly older, in their late 30s or early 40s, and therefore sometimes that means the advice is to go straight to IVF.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here's what's coming up. Are single women being priced out of motherhood? They've been left out of a new government policy that was meant to level up access to NHS-funded IVF. We'll be hearing from the women who are spending thousands of pounds on private treatment. And more on the UK's wild weather. I'll speak to the heartbroken landlady of that pub in Devon we saw a little earlier on that came tumbling down following heavy rain. Let's take a look now at some of the other stories making news in the UK tonight. More than 60 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested. This is after bringing traffic to a standstill in Westminster earlier today. Dozens of demonstrators lay down in the road near Parliament Square in Westminster, demanding an end to new oil and gas licences. The group is planning 3 weeks of climate action across London. The Metropolitan Police has vowed to use all available powers to tackle disruption. A third man has been found guilty of robbing Olympic cyclist Mark Cavendish and his wife at knife point at their home in Essex. 27-year-old Joe Jobson was part of a gang who threatened the couple whilst wearing balaclavas. They stole watches worth £700,000 back in November 2021. 2 other men were jailed in February for their part in the robbery. The parents of Madeleine McCann have received an apology from Portuguese police over their handling of their 3-year-old daughter's disappearance. Madeleine disappeared during a family holiday in the Algarve in May 2007. 4 months later, her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were made suspects. According to Panorama, a number of senior officers travelled from Lisbon to London this year and met Jerry McCann to apologise for the way detectives investigated the case and treated their family. And police in Doncaster are appealing for information after they were attacked with fireworks. A group launched the fireworks at officers while they were recovering a scooter believed to have been stolen and involved in a crime. Luckily, nobody was injured. South Yorkshire Police are now appealing for help identifying those involved. Campaigners say the health service is discriminating against single women who want fertility treatment. The number of women choosing solo motherhood is on the rise, up by 44% between 2019 and 2021. But they don't qualify for fertility treatment on the NHS and face paying thousands of pounds to go private. Sky's Milena Veselinovic has more.
For Jennifer, becoming a mother is a dream that's been fraught by obstacles. As a single woman, she was told she couldn't get IVF on the NHS. But after years of pushing, she finally got just one round.
This is an injection pen.
She finished it just days before turning 43, the age cut-off for further fertility treatment in her area. But it failed, and she's now spending thousands on IVF abroad.
From the time when I went to my GP initially, just to get some exploratory tests, it's actually been eight years to the point of getting IVF, which is a hell of a long time. And it was like pulling teeth at every stage.
And she is among a rising number of single women doing IVF, but finding barriers to NHS funding. Like new mum Georgie, who ploughed her savings into private treatment.
In total, with 6 rounds of IVF, I spent in the region of £40,000. If you'd told me that at the start, who knows what I would have actually said, but I think there's a big part of me that would have said, there's no way I can find that sort of money. I don't see how I can start this journey.
But for single women, there's no simple path to NHS-funded IVF. Each of NHS England's 42 integrated care boards make their own rules, and more than half of them don't include single women in IVF policy at all. A quarter require them to prove infertility to qualify by doing 12 rounds of self-funded artificial insemination. The rest require them to prove it by doing between 3 and 6 rounds, with a round of artificial insemination costing up to £1,600. In comparison, heterosexual couples are asked if they've been trying to conceive for 2 years.
Female same-sex couples who want IVF on the NHS also have to prove infertility by doing rounds of artificial insemination. But as part of the government's women's health strategy, they will have those rounds funded, all part of an effort, the government says, to equalise access to IVF. But for single women, the rules haven't changed, and they still have to pay out of pocket to qualify.
And that creates inequality, according to a legal expert.
In my view, single women should be treated similarly to same-sex couples, because inevitably they are in a similar situation if it comes to their ability to conceive. And so I would see this as a discriminatory treatment.
The government says that a review of guidelines which fertility policies are based on is due next year. But for those who feel they already missed out, that brings little comfort. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
Still to come on the UK tonight, a Scottish soldier is identified and laid to rest more than a century after his death. I'm going to speak to his great-niece and the war detective who identified him.
Friday nights are getting even livelier on Sky News. Join me for a different take on the big news stories of the week. You never know, we might even have a laugh along the way. For a fresh look at the news, Friday night with me, Neil Patterson, here on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back to the UK Tonight. Now, a Scottish soldier killed in World War I has been buried with full military honours after his body was identified more than a century after his death. Lance Sergeant Robert Brand of the 9th Battalion Highland Light Infantry was just 24 when he's believed to have been killed in April 19 during the Battle of the Lys. He was one of the thousands of British casualties in the First World War whose body was never found. That is, until the remains of 3 soldiers were discovered by archaeologists carrying out surveys before the extension of a farm. Artefacts found nearby identified the battalion the soldiers came from, and then efforts were made to narrow down who the men could be. Possible descendants were contacted and asked to provide a DNA sample, and Lance Sergeant Brand was positively identified using a simple cheek swab provided by his nephew. Well, last week, he was buried at a cemetery in Belgium alongside the 2 comrades who were with him. They are yet to be identified. Well, I'm joined now by Tracy Bowers, a Ministry of Defence war detective who works to identify the bodies of World War I soldiers, and Caroline Brand, the great-niece of Lance Sergeant Brand, whose father provided the DNA sample which led to his identification. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us on the UK Tonight. What a fascinating tale this is. Tracy, I'll come to you first, if I may. Just explain what a war detective does. There's a good starting point to this story.
Well, basically, our aim is to try and identify recently recovered casualties, mainly from the First World War, but we also do other conflicts as well. And they are mainly Army, although we also do RAF and Navy and Royal Marines. So when a casualty is recovered, usually in France or Belgium or somewhere on the Western Front, we try our very best to identify that casualty through research and artefacts, and also then we end up with trying to do DNA. So that, in a nutshell, is what we do to the casualties that are found, to try and give them a name and give them a proper burial when they never were afforded many, many years ago.
Yeah, it's something that, you know, the Ministry of Defence does not give up on. This is so important, not just to the UK, but to the families involved as well. Talk to me about the particular artefacts that led you to the Brand family's door.
So artefacts are nuggets that we absolutely need. So the first thing we found with these casualties was his cap badge. And that cap badge, actually, we have to find it with material attached because that shows he was wearing it and not just a souvenir that he had in his pocket. So this cap badge led us to the regiment. He also had on him other artefacts which gave us a clue as to when he was killed, because things like the respirators that soldiers were issued in the First World War changed over the period of that time. And we also knew that he was a soldier and not an officer, so he was another rank. So that narrowed down our search to know the regiment, know that he was a soldier in that regiment, and also the period that he would have been killed. And that's what started us off, knowing that he was from the Highland Light Infantry, and we could look then at the research on that actual particular battalion to try and work out how many were killed that were still missing from that location.
It's painstaking, time-consuming work, and it's a process of elimination. Caroline, I'm going to bring you in now, because who in your family got the call? Take up the story from your family's point of view.
Well, Dad got the letter and I done the cheek swab with him. We couldn't believe it. It's so exciting. It took a year to get to actually burying him. And, it's just fantastic. We're so grateful to the MOD to bring Uncle Robert back into our lives again, that he's actually been found and laid to rest with friends in the cemetery, and the great work they do, that don't give up hope if your relative hasn't been found, because there's hope. I mean, that was 106 years ago, and found with 2 of his friends as well. It's just been amazing for us. Really emotional for my dad. He couldn't make the journey, so he asked if I would take his place, and I was honoured.
Yeah, an unexpected and an emotional conclusion for your family. What did you know about your great Uncle Robert?
My dad's sister used to do a lot of genetic stuff in the family tree, and we did know of Uncle Robert. We did know he died young, but that was really all. We knew they were a big family. So he was my grandfather's brother, and I'd never seen a picture of him until they found him the picture a week before the burial. So now that we've got the picture, it looks so like my grandfather did, and my cousin Eric is actually his double. So it's just nice to put a face to him, and he's back in our lives again. Because I talk to everybody about him, everybody that will listen, I just talk about him, how proud we are. Yeah, but it was really emotional.
Yeah, Tracy, emotional for families and an enormous sense of pride for families as well. Talk to me about what happens after you've made contact with a family like the Brands. What then happens to their loved one?
Well, then we start organising with today's military a full burial for that person. And we work with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission to establish which cemetery they will be buried in, alongside comrades that died at the same time from the same regiment. And then our job really is working with today's current regiment, and in this case it was the Royal Regiment of Scotland, and asking them if they can provide us with a bearer party, a padre. In this case, because he was Scottish, we had a piper as well as a bugler, and they all come out with us to Belgium to conduct that ceremony. We also invite the locals, so the actual archaeologists who recovered his body were in attendance, as well as members of the Royal British Legion who are out in the branch out in Ypres in Belgium, along with locals, and we had a group of 50 cadets that came to arrange a ceremony so he is buried with the honour that he's deserved after he paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Caroline, one occasion you went to Belgium to represent your family. Obviously, because of your dad's health, he couldn't go. This was spread over 3 days. Talk to me about what you saw, how you felt, because just looking at some of that footage there, it comes back to that sense of pride, you know, about a family member who you never met, but you almost got to know through finding out, you know, what happened to him, where he ended up.
I think I was so amazed by the night before. We went for dinner and we met the full party that was going to be at the burial, all the soldiers, Tracy and all our colleagues with the detectives. And they all knew something about him. He just wasn't another person. They knew about him. They had learnt about him, where he had been, what he had done. Everybody spoke to us, and it was nice to do that. So it calmed me a little bit. We went up to the Menin Gate at 8 o'clock, where they hold a ceremony every single night at 8 o'clock, which is amazing. Apart from the Second World War was when it stopped. And we got right to the front there. We were treated like royalty. We got right to the front to see everything. Then the actual day of the burial, the ceremony, the pipes, of course, being a Scot, when I hear the pipes, that just fills me anyway. And even just people coming in off the road that were passing by, there's so many cemeteries round about the area that people are visiting their loved ones or just visiting just to pay respects to the fallen. They were coming in to pay respects to my uncle, someone they didn't know. People were coming up to me and thanking me for being there. Strangers, people that didn't even have anything to do with the MOD. It was just such a fantastic day, and then they had a beautiful reception after it. Again, you were made to feel part of the regiment. They've even invited Dad along, because Dad couldn't make his way there to Belgium, to go and see the regiment and maybe have a cup of tea with them as well, which I just think is fantastic, heartwarming. I'll never forget it the rest of my life.
It's a special corner of the world that commemorates those lost in war, and they really do treat everyone as their own. Tracy, you know, you can talk more about that. Caroline mentioned there the Menin Gate, the memorial in Flanders that bears the name of the hundreds of thousands of men who fell and have no known grave. Lance Sergeant Robert Brand now has a grave. Talk to me about what happens to the names on that gate when they are eventually found and given a burial.
Well, actually, Robert Brand is commemorated on a different memorial, not the Meningate. He's commemorated on Plug Street Memorial. But those soldiers' names, they do remain on that memorial until the Commonwealth War Graves replace maybe that panel, because there's so many names to replace the name when we've identified. So they are for a time identified both by their grave, their known grave, but there will always be the historical and the paper copy to show that they have been actually identified. And you've only got to look at those memorials to know that our work will never be done, because like you say, there are hundreds of thousands who are still missing and they do not have a burial place. We always recognise and commemorate them. That's why their names are on these beautiful memorials. But for families, I think it's really important that there is a grave with a person's name on and a personal inscription from that family, so they can go back if they want to and know that that's where he's buried.
Tracy, it is special work that you do. Thank you so much for coming on to tell us about it. Tracy Bowers there, a Ministry of Defence war detective. And Caroline, thank you so much for coming on to tell us about your great uncle, Lance Sergeant Robert Brand. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's go back to Devon now. In Stephen's report a little earlier, you saw a pub in Devon which partially collapsed after all the heavy rain that has been in the region over recent days. Well, this is the family-run Ship Inn, as you can see. The roof and one of its walls came tumbling down yesterday morning, taking the chef's living quarters with it. Staff were in the pub at the time, but luckily nobody was hurt. Now, the building dates from 1600, is made from cob, which is an old-fashioned material. It's a mixture of mud and straw. So when it's penetrated by water, it has this result. A little earlier, I called up with the landlady of that pub, Heather Brown.
This happened at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning before the pub opened its doors. So you're thankful for that. There were no customers in there.
Absolutely.
We can see the damage behind you. We can see just a small fraction of it. But when you were sent those pictures initially by your son, what went through your mind? What was your reaction?
I was absolutely devastated. We've been in business for 17 years in this village. We have endured a recession, we've endured COVID, we've come out the other side and things were just starting to return to normal. Well, if there is a normal in the hospitality trade. I mean, with the cost of living crisis and the increase in the cost of our raw materials, we hang on by our fingertips. We employ 20 people, full and part-time, and it is our livelihood. And then to see it just in the road, it was beyond belief, absolutely beyond belief. Especially as it's something that could have been dealt with.
Yeah. Heather, we're looking at the scene behind you now. You don't live at the pub, but your chef does. And I believe what we're looking at over your shoulder is his sitting room.
It is. His television is in the road behind me. His coffee table's halfway down the wall. You can see pictures of his family on the wall in the room. I mean, now I need to find him accommodation. It's heartbreaking.
And it's all on your shoulders at the moment, Heather. As you said, you know, hospitality going through a tough time. You're now having to go through the insurance process. I mean, I know it's early days. This only happened yesterday. But what's happening right now behind you? What are the next few days and weeks looking like?
Right. Well, I've had specialists on site this morning. They've done a preliminary survey, and from tomorrow they're bringing in specialist scaffolders to put a prop on the corner of the building right up to the roof line. Then they're very carefully going to do the same inside whilst propping up the floorboards. Once they have reassured the surveyors that the building is stable, then there will be a survey carried out in depth to review the situation and make a plan to move forward to potentially rebuild the pub.
Well, rebuilding the pub, in the meantime, can you open any part of the pub? Are you able to operate as a business? Because, of course, we're hurtling towards Christmas, which is the key period for pub.
Oh, our diary was filling up. We've had to contact people and explain the situation. But their building, until we've got stability, is condemned. We can't turn any of the utilities on, no gas, no electricity, no water. Until the building is stable, we can't go inside it at all. In the kitchen, there's roast potatoes in a dish on the side that were waiting to be served for lunch yesterday. The joints are still in the kitchen. It's heartbreaking.
It's a pause of a moment in time. It is early days, but any indication of when you might be able to restart in terms of could you be up and running by Christmas? Is that something that can be talked about?
The surveyors won't give me a date until they can carry out a survey safely. They're not committing to anything.
Yeah, which again is more devastation for you and your family, Heather, a family-run business.
Absolutely.
What's been the reaction of the local community?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we talk about pubs in this country being the community hub.
I've been overwhelmed with the messages of support from everybody in the village and customers far and wide, because we're a holiday destination in this area. We have people coming back from all over the country year in, year out, and the messages of support have been so rewarding, and it's just a real feel-good factor that people are so concerned about what is basically a village community.
Well, Heather, as you said, it is devastating. We wish you and your family well, and we really hope that the work that we can see already going on behind you gets you up and running as quickly as possible, particularly with that crucial
That's our hope
period.
as well.
Yeah, it's our hope as well for you, Heather. Heather, thank you so much for talking to us here on Sky News. We really appreciate it.
Coming up on the UK Tonight, we'll round up the day's sports news as England midfielder Jude Bellingham is named the best young player in world football. Plus, the cat that has become something of a celebrity in Stevenage.
My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please give our little girl back.
I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
Welcome back to the UK Tonight. Coming up, the cat that is covering up to 30 miles a day in its hometown and has become something of a local celebrity. First, though, David Fulton is here with the sports. Before we look at today's headlines, we can't get away with without reflecting on England in the cricket and this continuing failure at the World Cup, Dave. What's going on?
Well, I mean, how long have we got? About 45 seconds, which is not... I mean, it's at least 3 or 4 pints down the pub to put the world to rights on this one. Look, we're world champions, of course, let's not forget that. But going into 2019, we had this real clarity about how we were going to play. 4 years we've been building up to it, great preparation. We knew our players, we knew the brand of cricket we were going to be playing. That hasn't happened this time around. There's been personnel change. Our best players are not in great form. The likes of Ben Stokes retired, and he came out of retirement. He's our talisman. You thought, yeah, brilliant, he's back. But he just hasn't been in the kind of form we'd like. Josh Buttler's one of the best one-day players there's ever been. Has just been in poor form. So our best players are out of form. We've had no real clarity. We're playing in foreign conditions. That's only a little bit of an excuse. Obviously, we won it on home soil last time out. But, yeah, we've got still a bit to play for because the Champions Trophy is going to consist of the best 8 teams in this competition. We are 10th out of 10 at the moment, so it's not been good. So not good for England's cricketers. Better news, though, for one of our footballers at the Ballon d'Or Awards.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Just sum up what it means to you to be part of a team that is the first Arab team to go to a Women's World Cup.
You know, sometimes I still need to pinch myself of the journey that I've been on. The last year has been incredible, obviously international-wise. As you said, we're the first Arab team to qualify for the Women's World Cup. It's been an incredible time for the country, for Arab women in sport, and, you know, I think it's massive, and sometimes I really need to take a step back and actually look at what we've achieved because, you know, sometimes I can't put it into words. So it's been a real journey and one that I'm going to be proud of for the rest of my life. I wanted to play on the international stage, and for everyone that knows me, they know how much of a special place Morocco is for me. And, you know, it was just a choice that I thought I haven't got long left in my football career. The pride that my Moroccan family have, even my mum's family who are Scottish, the pride that they have for me playing for Morocco, I can't replicate that for anything else. And yeah, anyone that knows me knows how special it is for me to put on a Moroccan shirt. I think I've always had a close connection with my dad's side of the family. I've been going to Morocco as long as I can remember. But it feels extra special when you're putting on that country shirt. You know, you learn so much about the culture being in and around the other girls who are living in Morocco. You learn about the heritage even more, the religion. There's so many aspects about Morocco that, you know, I thought maybe I knew before I played for Morocco, but I'm just learning more and more. Every time I go on a camp, it's amazing for me, and, you know, it's something that I am so glad that I did, just because the impact that we're having for women in Morocco is incredible.
When you're mixed race, I'm guessing you get this, I get this a lot. People don't know where I'm from, they try and guess.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you get that as well.
All the time, yeah, all the time.
What difference does it make when you are putting on a football jersey, a shirt, and like you're wearing your identity on you physically?
Yeah, it's just immense pride. You know, I've always had a close connection with Morocco, but for strangers, they don't know I'm Moroccan. You know, they're always guessing other nationalities, other countries. So when I'm actually putting on that Morocco kit, I'm wearing it with such immense pride. You know, I'm so proud to be Moroccan. I'm so proud to represent that country. And it's just such a nice feeling.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Right, time now for a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Storm Kieran will bring the risk of damaging winds to the south on Thursday, along with widespread heavy rain. Before then, there'll be rain around, which may lead to further flooding and disruption. Rainfall warnings have been issued, with an amber warning covering parts of Northern Ireland tonight, where the hills could see up to 100 millimetres of rain. Scotland and central southern England will have a mainly dry evening, but elsewhere there's a risk of showers, some heavy, prolonged and perhaps thundery. There'll be little change overnight, but the showers will merge to give longer spells of heavy rain in places, especially across Northern Ireland. It's going to turn chilly under clear skies, while patchy fog may develop in the south. Early rain over Northern Ireland and Northern England will ease tomorrow morning, but it's going to stay rather dull and showery there.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And now we do like to bring you something weird and wonderful from around the UK to end the show. And Stevenage has found itself a new local celebrity. This is Nala, a very friendly feline who has made the town's train station her second home. Nala has been photographed hundreds of times by commuters, and normally she's found sitting on the ticket barriers. Nala, who is 4, visits the station morning and night when she knows she'll get the most attention from travellers. But it's not just the station where Nala roams. Her owner fitted her with a GPS collar, which revealed that she is covering more than 30 miles on her travels every day. And after dozens of phone calls, she had to be fitted with a second collar to let people know that, no, she's not lost. She's just an adventurer. Right, that's all from the UK Tonight. You can catch up on the highlights on our webpage. Scan the QR code on your screen. You can share your thoughts with us as well. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8 o'clock.